When you look at everything going on, particularly the situation in, well, what the source material refers to as Israel and what others call occupied Palestine, it's a lot to take in.
It really is. Just overwhelming sometimes.
Exactly. So what if we tried to, zoom out a bit? Today, we're going to try and do that. Not get bogged down in every single detail, but explore a perspective that tries to frame things with a sense of hope and maybe some direction, especially through a religious lens.
That's right. We're diving into a YouTube transcript today. It's from a talk by Belaal Assad called Signs of the Last Hour, Part 1 of 2.
Okay.
And it's interesting because it connects what's happening now to Islamic eschatology, which is basically the study of end times beliefs. It offers this, well, different framework for thinking about suffering, justice, and what might be coming.
So just to be clear, our aim here isn't to push any one religious view, but really just to pull out the key ideas from this particular perspective for you. We want to unpack the themes of hope, resilience, the speaker's view on justice, and how the future might look according to this source.
Makes sense.
Okay, let's get into it then. The talk kicks off with a really strong message, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About unwavering hope. Hope for believers, hope for anyone trying to do good, even when things look incredibly bleak.
Absolutely. That starting point is crucial. The speaker basically says life is a test. And it's a test for everyone, the good guys, the bad guys, the oppressor, the victim, everyone's being tested. And he argues that real victory, for a believer anyway, isn't necessarily winning in a worldly sense. It's about holding on to your principles, your conscience, staying true to the cause you believe is just.
Yeah, that integrity piece. And he mentions that quote about the highest form of jihad being speaking truth to a tyrant.
Right, a truthful word in front of a tyrant oppressor.
That really lands. The idea that moral courage is maybe the ultimate stand. But then he shifts, right? He moves to the specifics of the current situation, bringing in some pretty harsh viewpoints he'd heard.
Yeah, he sets up a contrast. He mentions hearing an Israeli soldier frame it as a simple good versus evil fight.
Okay.
And then he mentions an Israeli woman saying that in Gaza, only the hostages are innocent. He presents these and then offers his own perspective, characterizing the situation as a genocide, mentioning the blockade, the lack of aid getting in.
It's quite a shift, going from that big picture hope to these really specific, difficult realities. He also brings up something quite powerful about some Gazans choosing to stay.
Yes, despite the incredible danger. Choosing to remain in their homes, prioritizing, as he puts it, dignity, faith, and honor. Believing their ultimate reward is, well, not in this life.
That level of commitment, it's hard to fathom.
And that naturally leads him into the religious contest for understanding these kinds of trials. He brings up a verse from the Quran, Surah Al-Imran, which essentially says, look, believers will be tested, you'll hear hurtful things, but the reward for patience and being God-conscious is immense.
So the focus shifts. True success isn't about an easy life now, but about salvation later, being saved from evil.
Exactly. It's a fundamentally different metric for success. He then brings in another verse, Surah Al-Ankabut, which talks about how essential testing is.
Essential how?
To sort out who is truly steadfast in their faith and who isn't. The idea is that Allah uses hardship to sift, to distinguish the genuine from the, well, not so genuine.
Okay, so the difficulties aren't random. They serve a purpose in this view. And that connects to his point about history, doesn't it? That oppression doesn't last.
Right. He draws on this historical perspective. Empires rise, empires fall. Oppression has its day, but it eventually ends.
It's a cycle.
Yeah, he talks about Allah repeating history, bringing in new generations, new powers replacing old ones. But he adds a really important clarification.
Which is?
That you can't paint everyone with the same brush. Not all Jews, not all Christians, not all Muslims support oppression. It's about ideologies and actions, not entire religious groups.
That's crucial, avoiding those generalizations. Okay, then he introduces this concept I found pretty interesting, the mujadid, the reformer.
Yes, the hadith, that's a saying or tradition of the Prophet Muhammad about Allah sending a reformer to the Ummah, the global Muslim community, every 100 years or so.
And what's the significance of that idea right now?
Well, the speaker presents it as this source of recurring hope, a kind of divine recalibration against injustice. And he muses on what form this reformer might take. Could it be one person, a movement, an event.
So it's not necessarily a single figurehead?
Could be, or it could be broader. The key thing is this idea that guidance or correction emerges periodically. He even sort of hints that maybe the increased global awareness we see now could be part of this
Yeah.
calibration process.
That's an interesting interpretation, which connects to the poll data he mentioned, right? The CNN SRS one.
Yeah, from October 2023. Showing that younger generations, particularly in the West, are significantly less supportive of Israel's actions in Gaza compared to older generations.
And how does he read that data? What's his take?
He sees it pretty positively, actually, as a sign of increased awareness, maybe driven by social media transparency.
Uh-huh.
He suggests it shows a new generation that's more open to different perspectives and maybe, just maybe, a return to some core human values, a kind of moral awakening. He even floats the idea of a potential civilizational shift.
Finding hope even in polling data about a conflict. It's quite a perspective. Then he gets into the signs of the last hour, using that analogy.
Right.
The beads on a string.
Right. The image is that when the string is cut, the beads fall one after another quickly.
Okay.
So the signs, the major events leading to the end times, are expected to happen in sequence, often accelerating. It means that even huge events happening now from this viewpoint might just be one bead falling leading to the next and the next.
So it puts current events in a much larger, unfolding sequence. They're significant, but maybe not the final sign.
Precisely. Which then leads him to practical steps. What should Muslims do? Though honestly, a lot of these actions seem relevant for anyone concerned with justice.
What kind of actions does he suggest?
He lists about 9 things. Renewing your faith is number 1. Strengthening identity, especially for younger people. Making sincere dua, which is like deep personal prayer in Islam, more than just asking for things to change.
Okay.
Sharing information, getting educated on the issues, considering boycotts, but he stresses that's a personal conviction thing.
Right.
Reevaluating protests, maybe focusing on what he calls stormy silence, like silent gatherings, prayers. And finally, writing to political representatives, engaging proactively.
It's a real mix, personal, spiritual, community, political almost.
Definitely. And then the talk shifts again, moving more firmly into future expectations, prophecies within Islam, starting with Al-Mahdi.
Al-Mahdi. For anyone unfamiliar, who is that?
So, in Sunni Islam, Al-Mahdi is the guided one, believed to be a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad named Muhammad himself.
Okay.
He's expected near the end of time, his mission, to fill the earth with justice and equity, basically reversing the injustice that will be widespread before he comes.
And how long is he expected to rule?
The tradition says about 7 or 8 years, and during that time it's described as a period of incredible peace and abundance, lots of vegetation, wealth shared equally. He also mentions the Mahdi will break the cross, which is generally interpreted as refuting the Christian doctrine of the Trinity, and abolish the jizya, a historical tax on non-Muslims, supposedly because prosperity will be so widespread or people will willingly embrace Islam. The main point is this future promise of ultimate justice led by a divinely guided figure.
A very hopeful vision counteracting current realities.
Yeah.
He also mentioned Al-Sham, Greater Syria-Palestine area.
Yes, Al-Sham is seen as a really important region in these end times narratives, a place believers will migrate to, gather in, and there's a related belief about righteous people eventually returning to Al-Quds, Jerusalem,
Jerusalem, right?
supported by Quranic interpretations and hadith. It also connects to the prophecy about the caliphate returning with Jerusalem as its capital.
The caliphate, that's the Islamic system of governance.
Yes, based on Islamic principles. In this context, it's envisioned as a return to a just, righteous leadership model. He actually lays out a sequence mentioned in Hadith for how leadership evolves over time.
That's that sequence.
It starts with the era of prophethood itself, then the rightly guided caliphate immediately after the prophet. Then it declines into corrupt monarchy, then into tyrannical despotism, which the speaker suggests is where we are now.
Okay.
And the final stage is the return of the caliphate, but based on the original prophetic way.
A very specific historical and future trajectory. What comes after that, according to the source?
There are prophecies about a peace treaty with the Romans, often interpreted today as Western powers. But that treaty will eventually be broken.
Leading to conflict.
Yes, a huge battle is described, followed by the conquest of Constantinople, modern Istanbul.
And then things get even more dramatic, right? With the arrival of Dajjal.
Exactly. Dajjal, often called the false messiah or the antichrist figure in Islam. And closely following that, the return of Jesus, or Isa, as he's known in Islam.
That's a huge element in Islamic belief, the return of Jesus.
Absolutely central to the Yes, it does mention a hadith describing a conflict at the very end of time where Muslims will fight against certain Jewish groups associated with Dajjal. It includes the detail about rocks and trees revealing hiding places, except for one specific tree, the Garqad tree.
But the speaker stressed this is future, right? Not necessarily about now.
Yes, he was very clear on that. It's presented as a specific future end times event linked to the era of Dajjal, not a commentary on the present political conflict. It's important to maintain that distinction the source itself makes.
Got it. And Dajjal himself, what are his claims?
He'll initially claim to be the Messiah, then escalate his claim to divinity to being God himself. He'll perform great deceptive miracles and gather a massive following. The source specifically mentions 70,000 Jews from Isfahan in modern Iran, among his followers.
Wow.
But ultimately, he's confronted by Jesus in or near Jerusalem and defeated. And after that defeat,
Peace.
yes, a period of true peace, justice, and abundance under the guidance of Jesus following Islamic teachings.
It's a really detailed sequence of events. So how does he wrap it all up?
Well, he circles back to that beads on a string idea, reminding the listeners that what's happening now, however significant it feels, is one part of this much larger unfolding story. So the focus shouldn't just be on decoding every sign, but on your own faith, your own values, your actions right now. He ends with a message of hope, quoting Prophet Jacob telling his sons not to despair of Allah's mercy.
Right. Keep hope alive, essentially.
Exactly. Don't give up hope in God's plan, even when things seem incredibly dark.
So bringing this all together, what we've unpacked from this source is really a framework, a way of seeing current events rooted in Islamic faith as part of a grand narrative involving trials, yes, but also divine justice, resilience, and ultimately an expected positive transformation.
Yeah, there's a really strong emphasis throughout on holding on to hope, acting righteously now, and understanding these potential future events described in the religious texts as offering a larger context.
Definitely. And it's worth repeating, this is one specific viewpoint from one particular source and tradition.
Absolutely. We always encourage you to explore different perspectives, engage critically with everything you hear and read.
For sure. And maybe that leads us to a final thought for you to consider. How does hearing about these kinds of potential future narratives, as laid out in this source, influence the way you think about the challenges we're all facing today? Does it change your motivation for taking positive action in the here and now? Something to think about.